Princess Zarath stood at the vast observation deck of the Nexus station, her forearms folded behind her back as she watched the stars through the reinforced crystal walls. Her blue-scaled skin shimmered under the artificial lights, and her large golden eyes reflected the distant galaxies. She had seen thousands of species during her diplomatic missions across the known universe, but today would be different. Today, she would meet her first human. The Galactic Council had been buzzing about humans for months now. These strange bipedal creatures from a small blue planet called Earth had recently joined the galactic community, and their reputation preceded them. Some called them brave. Others called them reckless. A few whispered they were dangerous. Zarath adjusted her ceremonial robes, the finest silk from her homeworld of Thesara Prime. As the daughter of Emperor Vexith, she had been trained in diplomacy since childhood. She knew how to keep her emotions hidden, how to speak with authority, and how to never show weakness. These skills had served her well when dealing with the proud Cronan warriors, the cunning Velthari merchants, and even the ancient ethereal minds. But something about meeting a human made her feel uncertain. The station's communication system crackled to life. "Your Highness, the human delegation has arrived. They are requesting permission to board." Zarath straightened her spine. "Grant them access to Docking Bay 7. I will meet them in the diplomatic quarters." She walked through the corridors of Nexus Station, her elegant footsteps echoing on the polished metal floors. The station served as neutral ground for all species in the galaxy, a place where conflicts could be resolved through words instead of weapons. It was the perfect location for first contact with any new species. The diplomatic quarters were designed to accommodate various alien biologies. The room featured adjustable gravity, multiple atmosphere controls, and furniture that could shift to fit different body types. Zarath had reviewed the human files extensively. They were similar to her own species in some ways. They walked upright, had 2 arms and 2 legs, and possessed a complex social structure. But they had only 2 eyes, strange hair covering their heads, and skin that came in various shades of brown, black, and pale colors. What truly set humans apart, according to the reports, was their behavior. They had achieved faster-than-light travel in record time. Their planet had been racked by constant warfare, yet they had somehow managed to unite under a single planetary government. They showed an unusual willingness to risk their lives for strangers, and they possessed something called creativity that produced art, music, and literature unlike anything seen in the galaxy. The doors to the diplomatic quarters slid open with a soft hiss. Zarath positioned herself in the center of the room, hands clasped in the traditional Thessarian greeting pose. She had done this hundreds of times before. She was ready, but when the human delegation entered, she felt her breath catch in her throat. There were 3 humans total. 2 wore the formal blue uniforms of their diplomatic corps, an older male with gray hair and a younger female with brown skin and short black hair. But it was the 3rd human that captured her attention completely. He wore a different uniform, dark green with various symbols and patches. He was tall by human standards, with broad shoulders and a confident stride. His hair was short and black, his skin a warm tan color, and his eyes were a striking shade of blue she had never seen before. But what truly caught her off guard was the way he moved, like a predator, alert and ready, scanning the room for threats even in this peaceful setting. This had to be the human soldier mentioned in the files. The older diplomat stepped forward and bowed in what Zarath recognized as a human greeting. "Your Highness, I am Ambassador Richardson. This is Deputy Ambassador Martinez, and this is Staff Sergeant James Connor, our military liaison." Zarath nodded gracefully, grateful that her voice remained steady. "Welcome to Nexus Station. I am Princess Zarath of Thesara Prime. The Galactic Council is honored by your presence." As she spoke, she noticed the soldier, James Connor, was not looking at her with the mixture of awe and nervousness she was accustomed to seeing from other species. Instead, his blue eyes met hers directly, respectfully but without fear. Most beings found her imposing. At 8 feet tall with 4 arms and scales that could change color based on her mood, she had been told she could be intimidating. But this human looked at her as if she were simply another person. "The honor is ours, Your Highness," Ambassador Richardson replied. "We're grateful for this opportunity to strengthen ties between our species." The formal pleasantries continued, but Zarath found her attention constantly drifting to the soldier. He stood at attention, professional and alert, but she could see intelligence in his eyes. When Deputy Ambassador Martinez mentioned Earth's recent conflicts, she noticed a brief shadow cross his face. When they discussed human culture, she saw something that might have been pride. Staff Sergeant Connor, she found herself saying, interrupting the ambassador's mid-conversation. I'm curious about your role in this delegation. It's unusual for a warrior to accompany diplomats. The human soldier straightened, his blue eyes meeting hers again. When he spoke, his voice was deep and calm. Ma'am, in human culture, our military serves to protect and represent our people's values. I'm here to show that humanity takes this meeting seriously, and to demonstrate our commitment to peaceful relations. There was something in the way he spoke that made Zarath's scales shimmer slightly, a sign of interest that she quickly suppressed. His words were simple, but they carried weight. She had met many warriors from various species, but they usually spoke of conquest, honor, or strength. This human spoke of protection and values. Interesting, she murmured, then caught herself. She was staring again. Ambassador Richardson cleared his throat gently. Perhaps we could discuss the proposed trade agreements. For the next hour, they talked about mining rights, technological exchanges, and cultural programs. But throughout the entire conversation, Zarath found her gaze returning to the human soldier. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and precise. He had an alertness about him that spoke of experience, yet he treated everyone in the room with respect. As the meeting concluded, Zarath realized something that disturbed her greatly. For the first time in her diplomatic career, she was having trouble maintaining her composure. And it was all because of one human soldier with blue eyes and a quiet confidence that seemed to reach right through her carefully constructed defenses. She needed to know more about humans. She needed to understand what made them special. Most importantly, she needed to figure out why this particular human was affecting her so profoundly. The formal meeting had ended, but Princess Zarath found herself walking alongside the human delegation as they toured Nexus Station. She told herself it was standard diplomatic protocol, but the truth was more complicated. Something about the human soldier intrigued her in a way she couldn't understand. Staff Sergeant Connor walked slightly behind the ambassadors, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. When they passed the station's memorial wall, dedicated to beings who had died in various galactic conflicts, he stopped for a moment. His expression grew serious as he read the names carved in dozens of different alien languages. These were warriors from your people? He asked, looking at a section dedicated to Thessarian soldiers. Zarath nodded, surprised by his question. Most diplomats ignored the memorial entirely. Yes, they died defending trade routes from raiders 3 years ago. 17 of our finest. Connor studied the names for a long moment. Then, without any prompting, he placed his right hand over his heart and stood silently for several seconds. When he looked up, she saw something in his blue eyes that she recognized. The same expression her own soldiers wore when remembering fallen comrades. They died with honor, he said simply. The gesture was small, but it sent a strange warmth through Zarath's chest. In all her diplomatic encounters, no foreign species had ever acknowledged her people's military sacrifices so personally. As they continued the tour, Ambassador Richardson explained various human technologies and cultural achievements. But Zarath found herself more interested in observing the soldiers' reactions. When they passed a group of young Velthari children whose parents had brought them to see the station, Connor smiled genuinely. When an elderly Cronin veteran struggled with a heavy bag, the human immediately stepped forward to help, despite the Cronin being twice his size. Your soldier is different from what I expected, Zarath commented quietly to Ambassador Richardson as they walked. The ambassador chuckled. James is one of our best. He's seen more combat than most, but he's also studied alien cultures extensively. The military chose him specifically for this mission because he represents what humanity strives to be, which is strong enough to protect what we love, wise enough to know when not to fight, and curious enough to learn from others. They entered the station's central plaza, a massive open area where various species mingled freely. Street vendors sold exotic foods, artists displayed their work, and children from a dozen different worlds played together. It was one of the few places in the galaxy where true peace existed. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency protocols activated, the station's artificial intelligence announced. Hull breach detected in Sector 7. Atmospheric containment failing. All personnel evacuate immediately. Panic erupted in the plaza. Beings scattered in all directions, screaming in various languages. Parents grabbed their children, vendors abandoned their stalls, and security forces tried desperately to maintain order. Zarath activated her communicator. "Command, this is Princess Zarath. What's the situation?" "Your Highness, a damaged freighter collided with the station. We have massive structural damage and approximately 40 civilians trapped in the affected area. Emergency teams are responding, but it will take at least 20 minutes to reach them." 20 minutes? Zarath's scales darkened with worry. The atmosphere will be gone by then. She looked around for the human delegation and saw Ambassador Richardson and Deputy Ambassador Martinez being escorted to safety by station security. But Staff Sergeant Connor was nowhere to be seen. "Where's your soldier?" she demanded. Richardson looked confused. "He was right behind us." James! A young Velthari female, no more than a child, came running through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She was speaking rapidly in her native language, but Zarath's translator converted her words. My brother is still in there. Please, someone help my brother." Before anyone could react, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Where was he last seen? It was Connor. He had appeared beside the child and was kneeling down to her level, his voice calm despite the emergency around them. The child pointed toward the damaged sector. "The game center! He was playing in the game center!" Zarath stepped forward. "Sergeant, that area is sealed off. The emergency teams will handle the rescue." Connor looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It wasn't fear or recklessness. It was determination backed by absolute certainty. "Ma'am, with respect, 20 minutes is too long. That kid doesn't have 20 minutes. "You can't possibly be thinking of going in there," Ambassador Richardson protested. "It's suicide. The atmospheric pressure is dropping rapidly, and the structure could collapse at any moment." "Then I better move fast," Connor replied, already checking his equipment. Zarath watched in amazement as the human soldier quickly assessed the situation. He pulled out a small device from his belt, some kind of portable atmosphere detector, and studied the readings. Then he grabbed an emergency oxygen mask from a nearby station and tested its seal. "The damage is localized to the outer sections," he said, more to himself than to them. "If I can reach the game center through the inner corridors, I might have enough time before the pressure equalizes." "This is madness," Zarath said. But even as she spoke the words, she felt something stirring in her chest. She had seen many brave acts in her lifetime, but this was different. This human was risking his life for a child he had never met, from a species he barely knew, in a place that wasn't even his home. Connor stood up and looked directly at her. "Your Highness, in my experience, sometimes doing the right thing looks like madness to everyone else. But that doesn't make it wrong." Without waiting for permission, he turned and ran toward the damaged sector. Zarath found herself running after him, her long legs easily keeping pace. "Sergeant, stop!" He slowed but didn't stop. "Ma'am, I have to do this." "I know," she said, surprising herself. "But you're not going alone." Connor stopped and stared at her. "Your Highness, I can't let you— Let me?" Zarath's scales flickered with indignation, then settled into a determined silver. "Sergeant, I have 4 arms, enhanced strength, and natural resistance to pressure changes. You have courage and tactical experience. Together we might actually save that child." For a moment, Connor just looked at her. Then he smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him, and she felt her heart skip a beat. "Yes, ma'am. Let's go save a kid." As they ran toward danger together, Zarath realized that everything she thought she knew about courage, about leadership, and about what it meant to be strong was about to change, and it was all because of one human soldier who couldn't walk away from a child in danger. The station shook around them as they entered the damaged section, but Zarath no longer felt afraid. For the first time in her life, she was running toward danger instead of calculating the diplomatic implications. And it felt absolutely right. The damaged section of Nexus Station was a maze of twisted metal and flickering lights. Emergency barriers had sealed most of the area, but Connor had found a maintenance shaft that led toward the game center. As they crawled through the narrow passage, Zarath watched the human soldier work with growing amazement. Connor moved with practiced efficiency, checking for structural damage, monitoring his atmosphere detector, and marking their path with small chemical lights so they could find their way back. Every few meters he would stop and listen, his head tilted as if he could hear things she couldn't. "How do you know which way to go?" Zarath whispered as they reached another junction. Connor pointed to a small air current that she hadn't noticed. Air flows toward areas of lower pressure. The game center should be in that direction. He paused, studying his detector again. "We have maybe 8 minutes before the atmosphere becomes too thin to sustain most life forms." 8 minutes. Zarath had participated in countless emergency drills, but this was different. This was real, and there was a child's life hanging in the balance. They emerged from the maintenance shaft into a corridor filled with debris. The lights here were completely dead, and only the emergency illumination strips provided any visibility. Connor immediately pulled out a small flashlight and swept it across the area. "There," he said, pointing to a sign in multiple languages. "Game center, 50 meters." They moved quickly but carefully, Connor leading the way around fallen ceiling panels and exposed wiring. Zarath noticed that he kept himself between her and the most dangerous obstacles, despite the fact that she was physically stronger and more durable. "Why do you do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Put yourself in more danger to protect me. I'm a trained diplomat with combat experience. I can handle myself." Connor glanced back at her, and even in the dim light, she could see his expression. "Ma'am, it's not about whether you can handle yourself. It's about doing what's right. Where I come from, you protect others when you can, especially those you care about." Those you care about. The words sent another strange warmth through her chest. They reached the entrance to the game center, and Connor's expression grew grim. The door was sealed, and they could hear the faint sound of crying from inside. "Hello?" Connor called out, pressing his ear to the door. "Can anyone hear me?" A small voice answered in Velthari, which Zarath's translator converted. "Help! I'm scared. The door won't open." Connor examined the door's control panel. It was damaged, sparks occasionally shooting from the exposed circuits. "The emergency lockdown sealed it when the pressure started dropping. I need to override it manually." He pulled out a small toolkit and began working on the panel. Zarath watched his hands move with surprising delicacy as he traced wiring and tested connections. For someone whose profession was warfare, he showed remarkable gentleness and precision. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. "My father was an engineer," Connor replied without looking up. He always said that breaking things was easy, but fixing them required understanding how they worked in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on Zarath. Here was a human soldier trained for destruction using engineering skills to save a life. "Got it," Connor said as the door slid open with a grinding sound. Inside, they found a small Velthari boy, maybe 6, years old by human standards, huddled in a corner surrounded by broken gaming equipment. He looked up at them with large, frightened eyes. Connor immediately knelt down and spoke in a calm, gentle voice. "Hey there, buddy. I'm James, and this is Princess Zarath. We're here to get you out of here, okay?" The child looked between them uncertainly. Zarath stepped forward and spoke in fluent Velthari, explaining who they were and that they were there to help. The boy's fear lessened slightly, but he was still trembling. Connor reached into his pack and pulled out a small object, a chocolate bar from Earth. "Are you hungry? This is from my planet, it's sweet." The simple gesture worked better than all of Zarath's diplomatic reassurances. The boy smiled slightly and accepted the chocolate. "What's your name?" Connor asked. "Kex," the boy replied in accented standard. "Well, Kex, we need to leave now. The air outside isn't very good, so I'm going to carry you, and Princess Zarath is going to help us find the way out. Is that okay?" Kex nodded, and Connor gently lifted the child onto his back. As they prepared to leave, Connor's atmosphere detector began beeping rapidly. "We have a problem," he said quietly to Zarath. "Oxygen levels are dropping faster than expected. I don't think we can make it back the way we came." Zarath felt a moment of panic, but then she noticed something remarkable. Despite the danger, despite the fact that they might all die here, Connor remained completely calm. His breathing was steady, his voice was level, and his movements were controlled. The child on his back seemed to sense this calmness and had stopped crying. Is there another way out? Connor asked. Zarath thought quickly, visualizing the station's layout. There's an emergency airlock 2 levels down, but it requires manual operation. Can you operate it? Yes, but... She hesitated. It's designed for station personnel only. Using it without authorization could be considered a serious violation of treaty. Connor looked at her with those blue eyes that seemed to see right through her diplomatic training. Your Highness, sometimes breaking rules is the right thing to do. The statement was so simple, so matter-of-fact, that it took her breath away. In her world, rules and protocols were everything. They maintained order, prevented conflicts, and ensured proper procedures were followed. But here was a human telling her that sometimes doing the right thing was more important than following rules. And she realized he was absolutely right. This way, she said, leading them toward a service elevator. As they descended through the station's emergency systems, Zarath found herself thinking about what she had witnessed. Connor had risked his life for a stranger, had shown gentleness to a frightened child, had demonstrated technical skills beyond his training, and had maintained perfect composure under extreme pressure. But what struck her most was his moral certainty. He didn't hesitate when faced with difficult choices. He simply did what he believed was right, regardless of personal cost or political implications. When they reached the emergency airlock, Zarath used her diplomatic codes to override the system. As the outer doors opened and they stepped into the main station area, they were met by emergency personnel and the boy's family. The reunion was emotional, with the Velthari parents alternately hugging their son and thanking Connor and Zarath. Ambassador Richardson and the rest of the human delegation rushed over, relief evident on their faces. "James, what were you thinking?" Ambassador Richardson demanded. "You could have caused a diplomatic incident." But before Connor could answer, the Velthari mother stepped forward and spoke directly to the ambassador in careful standard. "Your soldiers saved my son's life. In our culture, this creates a debt that can never be repaid. Please tell your people that the Velthari will always remember this kindness." As the crowd dispersed and the emergency teams finished their work, Zarath found herself standing alone with Connor in a quiet corner of the station. "Sergeant," she said softly, "what you did today. It was extraordinary." Connor shrugged, as if risking his life for a stranger was perfectly normal. "Just doing what needed to be done, ma'am." "No," Zarath said, her scales shimmering with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "What you did was more than duty. It was human." For the first time since meeting him, Connor looked uncertain. "Is that a good thing?" Zarath met his gaze, and for a moment, she forgot all about diplomatic protocol and royal composure. "Yes, Sergeant Connor. I'm beginning to think it's a very good thing indeed." As she walked away, she knew that her understanding of courage, leadership, and moral strength had fundamentally changed. And it was all because of one human soldier who had shown her what it truly meant to do the right thing. Later that evening, Princess Zarath found herself in the observation lounge of Nexus Station, staring out at the stars. The formal diplomatic meetings had concluded, and the human delegation would be departing the next morning. She should have been reviewing trade agreements and cultural exchange proposals, but instead she couldn't stop thinking about the events of the day. Couldn't sleep either. She turned to find Staff Sergeant Connor approaching, 2 cups in his hands. He had changed out of his formal uniform into what appeared to be casual human clothing, simple pants and a shirt that somehow made him seem more approachable. "I brought coffee," he said, offering her one of the cups. "It's a human drink. Might be too bitter for your taste, but I thought you might want to try it." Zarath accepted the cup, inhaling the strange, rich aroma. "Thank you. I was just thinking about today." Connor settled into a chair nearby, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "The kid's going to be fine if that's what you're worried about. Station medical checked him out. No permanent damage." "That's not what I was thinking about," Zarath admitted, taking a small sip of the coffee. It was bitter, but there was something energizing about it that she found appealing. "I was thinking about what you said earlier, about sometimes breaking rules to do the right thing." Connor nodded slowly. "That bothers you?" "It should bother me," she said. "I've been trained my entire life to follow protocol. to consider the political implications of every action, to think about how decisions affect relations between species. But today, she paused, searching for the right words. Today, none of that mattered. There was just a child in danger and you acted without hesitation. Would you have hesitated? Connor asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. I don't know. I'd like to think I wouldn't, but honestly, I probably would have tried to find a way to follow proper procedures first, and the kid might have died while you were filling out the paperwork. Zareth looked at him sharply, but there was no judgment in his voice. He was simply stating a fact. How do you do it? She asked. How do you know when to follow rules and when to break them? Connor was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars. My grandfather used to tell me something when I was young. He said that laws and rules exist to protect people and make society work. But if following a rule would hurt innocent people or prevent you from doing what's right, then the rule is broken, not you. Your grandfather sounds wise. He was. He fought in one of Earth's last major wars before we unified. Seen a lot of people die because someone was too afraid to make a hard choice. Connor took a sip of his coffee. He also taught me that being strong isn't about how much you can lift or how fast you can run. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Zareth studied his profile as he spoke. There was something about the way he talked about his family, about his values, that made her feel warm inside. In her culture, strength was measured by political influence, military rank, or technological achievement. But Connor spoke of strength as something internal, something moral. Tell me about Earth, she said impulsively. Connor looked at her with surprise. What do you want to know? Everything. What's it like growing up human? What do your people value? What makes someone a hero in your culture? For the next hour, Connor talked about his home planet. He described vast oceans and towering mountains, cities that stretched toward the sky and forests that seemed to go on forever. He talked about human diversity, how billions of people with different skin colors, languages, and beliefs had somehow learned to work together. It wasn't easy, he admitted. We spent most of our history fighting each other over resources, territory, ideology. We nearly destroyed ourselves several times, but we learned something important along the way, which was that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. A human from the African continent thinks differently than one from Asia or Europe or the Americas. They have different perspectives, different solutions to problems. When we finally started listening to each other instead of just fighting, we became capable of amazing things. Zareth found this fascinating. Most galactic species were relatively homogeneous. The Cronins were all warriors. The Velthari were all traders. Her own people were all focused on politics and diplomacy. But humans seemed to encompass multiple archetypes within a single species. What about you? Connor asked. What's it like being a princess? Zareth laughed, a sound that surprised them both. Honestly, lonely. I've been groomed for leadership since birth. Every conversation is political. Every relationship is strategic. I have advisors and bodyguards and servants, but I don't think I have any real friends. That sounds difficult. It is what it is, she said, then paused. Though I must admit, today was the first time in years that I've done something purely because it felt right, not because it was politically advantageous. How did it feel? Zareth considered this seriously. Terrifying, exhilarating, real. She looked at him directly. How do you do it? How do you live without constantly calculating the consequences of your actions? Connor smiled, that genuine smile that made her heart skip. I don't live without calculating consequences. I just don't let those calculations stop me from doing what I know is right. There's a difference. Show me, she said suddenly. Show you what? How to be human. How to make decisions with your heart instead of just your head. The words came out in a rush and she immediately felt embarrassed. I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me. No, it wasn't, Connor said gently. But I'm not sure I can teach you how to be human. You're already something better, you're yourself. But I want to understand. Today, when we were in that damaged section, I felt something I've never felt before. I felt alive, fully alive. Not just going through diplomatic motions, but actually living. Connor studied her face for a long moment. What do you feel right now? The question was simple, but it hit her like a shockwave. What did she feel? Not what was politically appropriate to feel. Not what her training told her to feel, but what she actually felt. Confused, she said honestly. Fascinated, grateful, and She hesitated, her scales shifting to a pale pink color she couldn't control. And something else I don't have a word for. What does it feel like? Like I want to know everything about you. Like I want to spend more time learning how you think, how you see the world. Like I want to be the kind of person who runs toward danger to save a child without thinking about the political implications. She paused, her scales now a deeper pink. Is that what humans call attraction? Connor's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't look away. It might be part of it. Have you ever felt it? Attraction to someone from another species? I'm feeling it right now, Connor said quietly. The admission hung in the air between them, electric and dangerous and wonderful. Zareth felt her careful diplomatic composure crumbling completely. This is impossible, she whispered. I'm a princess, you're a soldier from a species we barely know. There are protocols, procedures, political implications. Are you going to let those stop you from exploring what you're feeling? The question was pure Connor, direct, honest, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. And Zareth realized that for the first time in her life, she didn't want to let protocols and procedures make her decisions for her. No, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm not. Connor smiled, and this time she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Something that had nothing to do with diplomacy, and everything to do with the way this human soldier had shown her what it meant to be brave, to be genuine, to be fully alive. Tomorrow, he would leave for Earth, and she would return to her diplomatic duties. But tonight she wanted to learn what it meant to be human, and perhaps in the process, she would finally learn what it meant to be herself. Princess Zareth woke to the sound of urgent alarms echoing through Nexus Station. For a moment she thought she was dreaming about the previous day's emergency. But the shrill tone was different this time. This wasn't a structural alert. This was a security warning. She quickly dressed in her formal robes and activated her communicator as she rushed toward the command center. This is Princess Zareth. What's the situation? Your Highness, came the strained voice of Station Commander Veltar. We have a hostile force approaching. 3 Raider Coalition ships heavily armed. They're demanding we surrender the station's defense codes and hand over all diplomatic personnel. Zareth's blood ran cold. The Raider Coalition was a group of outcasts from various species who had banded together to prey on peaceful ships and stations. They were known for their brutality and their complete disregard for diplomatic immunity. How long until they arrive? She asked, already running through the station's corridors. 20 minutes, maybe less. We've sent distress signals, but the nearest military response is at least 2 hours away. 2 hours. The station's defenses were minimal. Nexus Station was designed as a neutral diplomatic facility, not a fortress. They had perhaps 50 security personnel, mostly trained for crowd control and minor disputes, not military combat. She reached the command center to find chaos. Station personnel were frantically coordinating evacuations while trying to figure out how to defend against a force they were never designed to fight. In the middle of it all, she spotted the human delegation. Ambassador Richardson was speaking rapidly into a communication device, presumably trying to contact Earth. Deputy Ambassador Martinez was helping coordinate civilian evacuations, and Staff Sergeant Connor was standing at a tactical display, studying the incoming ships with the focused intensity she had seen during the rescue. "Sergeant," she called out as she approached him. He looked up, and she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Not quite fear, but a cold, calculating awareness that this was a very dangerous situation. "Your Highness, are you being evacuated with the other diplomatic personnel?" "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "This is my post. These people are under my protection." Connor nodded approvingly. "What are the station's defensive capabilities?" "Minimal. We have basic shields and a few point defense turrets, but nothing that could stand against 3 Raider ships." She gestured at the tactical display. "What do you see?" Connor studied the data streams showing the approaching vessels. They're not military grade, but they're heavily modified. Upgraded weapons, reinforced hulls, and they're flying in a wolf pack formation. Whoever's commanding them knows what they're doing. Can we fight them? Not conventionally. Not with what this station has. Connor paused, his expression thoughtful. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. Commander Veltar approached them, his reptilian features showing obvious stress. "Your Highness, with respect, you and the other diplomatic personnel need to evacuate immediately. We can hold them off long enough for you to escape." "And what about the thousands of civilians on this station?" Zareth demanded. "The families, the children, the merchants. Do we just abandon them? We don't have a choice. We can't fight 3 raider ships. Yes, we can, Connor said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. The command center fell silent except for the background hum of computers and the distant sound of evacuation alerts. Sergeant, Ambassador Richardson said carefully, this isn't Earth's fight. We're diplomats, not a military force. Connor looked at his superior officer with respect but absolute determination. Sir, there are innocent people on this station, children like the boy we saved yesterday. If we run now, those raiders will kill them or worse. That's not our responsibility. With respect, sir, yes it is. The moment we decided to be part of the galactic community, their safety became our responsibility. Connor turned to Commander Veltar. How many security personnel do you have? 48, but they're not trained for ship-to-ship combat. They don't need to be. What they need is someone who understands human military tactics. Connor moved to the tactical display and began manipulating the controls. These raiders are expecting a quick surrender or a conventional defense. They're not expecting asymmetric warfare. Zareth watched as Connor began outlining a strategy that was unlike anything she had ever seen. Instead of trying to match the raiders' firepower, he proposed using the station's civilian infrastructure against them. Cargo bay doors could be rigged as makeshift missile launchers. Maintenance drones could be loaded with explosives and piloted remotely. Even the station's artificial gravity could be weaponized. This is insane, Commander Veltar protested. These modifications would take hours to implement. We don't have hours, Connor replied. But we don't need hours. We just need to convince them that attacking this station will cost them more than they're willing to pay. And if we fail? Connor met his gaze steadily. Then we fail fighting for something worthwhile. But we won't fail. The certainty in his voice was absolute, and Zareth felt that same warm feeling in her chest that she had experienced during the rescue. This was what made humans special. Not their technology or their strength, but their refusal to give up when protecting others. I'm staying to help, she announced. Your Highness, Ambassador Richardson protested. This is far too dangerous. Yesterday, Sergeant Connor taught me that sometimes doing the right thing looks like madness to everyone else, but that doesn't make it wrong. She looked directly at Connor. What do you need me to do? For the next 15 minutes, the command center became a whirlwind of activity. Connor coordinated with station security to implement his unconventional tactics, while Zareth used her diplomatic authority to override safety, protocols, and authorize modifications to station systems. She watched in amazement as Connor transformed frightened security guards into a coordinated, defensive force. He didn't just give them orders. He explained the reasoning behind each tactic, made sure they understood their role in the larger strategy, and somehow managed to fill them with confidence despite the overwhelming odds. How do you do that? She asked him during a brief lull in the preparations. Do what? Make people believe they can do impossible things. Connor smiled grimly. Because they can. Humans learned a long time ago that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're fighting for something they believe in. These security guards aren't soldiers, but they're protecting their home, their families, their friends. That makes them more dangerous than any raider. The tactical display showed the raider ships approaching their final attack position. In a few minutes, they would demand surrender. And when the station refused, they would attack. Incoming transmission from the lead raider ship, the communications officer announced. Put it on screen, Commander Veltar ordered. The main display showed the bridge of a raider vessel. The captain was a scarred Cronin with cybernetic implants replacing one eye and most of his left arm. When he spoke, his voice was a low growl. Nexus Station, this is Captain Gex of the Raider Coalition. You will surrender control of your station and deliver all diplomatic personnel to our ships. You have 5 minutes to comply, or we will take the station by force and kill everyone aboard. Commander Veltar looked at Zareth, clearly hoping she would authorize surrender. But Zareth found herself thinking about the Velthari child Connor had saved, about the families in the civilian quarters, about the merchants and artists and dreamers who had come to this station seeking peace. She stepped forward, her forearms crossed in the traditional Thessarian stance of defiance. Captain Gex, she said clearly, this is Princess Zareth of Thessara Prime. I speak for all the civilized species represented on this station when I say, go to hell. The Cronin's remaining eye widened in surprise, then narrowed with rage. You will regret that decision, Princess. As the transmission ended, Connor moved to stand beside her. That was very human of you, Your Highness. I learned from the best, she replied. feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration coursing through her veins. The battle for Nexus Station was about to begin, and she was no longer a diplomatic observer. She was a warrior, standing beside a human who had shown her what it meant to fight for something greater than herself. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. The first Raider attack came exactly 5 minutes after their ultimatum expired. The station shook as energy weapons hammered against the shields, but instead of the quick collapse Captain Gex had expected, Nexus Station fought back with a ferocity that caught the Raiders completely off guard. Princess Zarath stood in the command center, watching Connor coordinate the defense with a skill that bordered on the supernatural. He had divided the station's limited forces into multiple teams, each responsible for a different aspect of his unconventional strategy. Team Alpha, deploy the cargo containers now, Connor spoke into his communicator, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Remember, they're expecting static defenses. Give them something they've never seen before. On the tactical display, Zarath watched as massive cargo containers suddenly ejected from the station's loading bays. But these weren't random debris. Connor had filled them with improvised explosives and programmed them to detonate when the Raider ships passed through their trajectory. The lead Raider ship, expecting minimal resistance, flew directly into the trap. The explosion wasn't powerful enough to destroy the vessel, but it damaged their forward shields and, more importantly, caught them completely by surprise. What was that? Came Captain Gex's angry voice over the communication channel he had left open. Some kind of minefield? Connor smiled grimly. Team Beta, initiate Phase 2. Suddenly, the station's maintenance drones, normally used for exterior repairs, swarmed toward the Raider ships. But Connor had modified them, loading each drone with small explosive charges and overriding their safety protocols. The Raiders tried to shoot down the drones, but there were too many of them, and they were moving in random patterns that made targeting difficult. Several drones reached the Raider hulls and detonated, creating small breaches that forced the ships to divert power to emergency repairs. This is impossible, Commander Veltar muttered, watching the display in amazement. We're actually hurting them. We're doing more than that, Connor replied. We're making them angry. Angry people make mistakes. As if to prove his point, the second Raider ship broke formation and charged directly at the station, apparently intending to ram through the shields and board them. It was exactly what Connor had been waiting for. Team Gamma, execute gravity well maneuver. Now. Zarath watched as Connor's most audacious plan unfolded. He had convinced the station's engineers to create an artificial gravity while using the station's main power core. As the charging Raider ship approached, suddenly the gravitational field around the station intensified dramatically. The Raider ship, moving at high speed, was caught in the gravity well and pulled into an uncontrolled spin. The pilot tried to compensate, but human physics had trapped him in a situation his ship's navigation system couldn't handle. Impossible, Captain Gex roared. How are they manipulating gravity? Team Delta, boarding party is incoming on Vector 7. Connor continued, ignoring the communication. Remember, they're expecting us to defend from behind barriers. Don't give them what they expect. The spinning Raider ship had managed to dock with the station, despite the gravitational chaos, and Zarath could hear the sound of cutting tools as the Raiders tried to breach the airlocks. But Connor had prepared for this too. Instead of setting up defensive positions near the breach point, he had positioned his security teams throughout the station's corridor network. When the Raiders finally broke through, they found themselves in a maze where every intersection could hide an ambush, where the lights could be controlled remotely to create confusion, and where the artificial gravity could be adjusted to favor the defenders. Zarath had requested permission to join the corridor fighting, but Connor had given her a different task, one that required her diplomatic skills and her natural authority. Your Highness, he had said, I need you to coordinate the civilian evacuations to the secure areas, but more importantly, I need you to keep them calm. People fight better when they know their families are safe. Now, as she listened to the reports coming in from the corridors, she understood the brilliance of Connor's strategy. The Raiders were facing something they had never encountered before, asymmetric warfare designed by a human military mind. The corridor battles weren't fought like traditional ship-to-ship boarding actions. Connor's teams used hit-and-run tactics, appearing suddenly to attack the Raiders, then disappearing into the maintenance shafts and service corridors they knew better than the invaders. This is Sergeant Torres, came a voice over the communication system. "We've got the raiders on level 7 pinned down, but they're trying to reach the power core." "Negative," Connor replied immediately. "Let them reach the power core, sir." "Trust me, Sergeant." "Team Echo, are you in position?" "Team Echo ready, sir." Zarath watched as Connor allowed the raiders to fight their way toward what they thought was the station's most vulnerable point. But when they reached the power core chamber, they found it empty except for a holographic message from Connor. "Hello, gentlemen. If you're seeing this, you've just walked into the most secure area of the station. The doors you came through are now sealed. The artificial gravity in that section has been set to maximum, and in about 30 seconds, that room is going to be flooded with a harmless but very effective sleeping gas. Sweet dreams." On the tactical display, Zarath watched as the raider boarding party simply collapsed. Connor had turned the station's own life support systems into a non-lethal weapon. "Captain Gex," Connor's voice came over the open communication channel. "This is Staff Sergeant James Connor of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. Your boarding party is safe but unconscious. Your second ship is trapped in our gravity well with damaged engines, and your own vessel has taken significant damage from our unconventional defenses. I suggest you withdraw while you still can." The response was a stream of Cronan profanity that Zarath's translator refused to convert. "I take it that's a no," Connor said calmly. "Team Alpha, initiate final phase. Light them up." The last phase of Connor's plan was the most audacious yet. He had convinced the station's engineers to overload the main communication array, turning it into a massive directed energy weapon. It wasn't powerful enough to destroy a ship, but it could disable their engines and communication systems. The beam lanced out from the station and struck Captain Gex's ship. Immediately, the raider vessel went dark as its systems overloaded. For several minutes, there was complete silence. Then slowly, emergency power came back online aboard the raider ship. "Nexus Station," came Captain Gex's voice, now subdued and respectful. "We withdraw. This fight is no longer profitable." "Smart choice," Connor replied. "Your boarding party will be returned to you unharmed. But Captain, if I ever see your ships in this system again, I won't be so generous." As the raider ships limped away from the station, Zarath felt a mixture of relief, amazement, and something deeper that she was finally ready to acknowledge as love. Connor had just demonstrated something she had never seen before, the ability to win a battle without becoming a monster. He had defeated a superior force using intelligence, creativity, and tactics that minimized casualties on both sides. Even the enemy boarding party had been captured without being killed. "How?" she asked him as the command center erupted in cheers around them. "How did you know all of that would work?" Connor looked tired but satisfied. Human military doctrine is based on a simple principle: adapt, improvise, overcome. When you're facing a superior force, you don't try to match their strength. You change the rules of the game entirely. And the non-lethal approach? Another human principle. The best victory is the one where your enemy lives to learn from their mistakes. Dead raiders become martyrs. Defeated raiders become cautionary tales. Commander Veltar approached them, his expression a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Sergeant Connor, on behalf of Nexus Station and all the lives you saved today, I cannot thank you enough. Your tactics were unprecedented." "Just human tactics applied to an alien situation," Connor replied modestly. But Zarath knew better. What she had witnessed today wasn't just military strategy. It was a fundamental way of thinking that placed the value of life above the glory of victory, that chose creativity over brute force, and that protected the innocent while showing mercy to the guilty. As the celebration continued around them, she found herself looking at Connor with new eyes. This human soldier had shown her what it meant to be strong without being cruel, to be victorious without being vengeful, and to lead without losing one's humanity. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was completely and hopelessly in love with him. The question now was what she was going to do about it. 3 days after the raider attack, Princess Zarath stood once again in the observation lounge of Nexus Station, but this time she wasn't alone with her thoughts. Staff Sergeant Connor sat beside her, both of them watching the stars in comfortable silence. The human delegation's departure had been delayed while station repairs were completed and formal reports were filed. But Zarath knew that wasn't the real reason Connor was still here. The real reason was sitting in the space between them, unspoken, complex, and growing stronger with each passing hour. The Galactic Council wants to study your defensive tactics, she said finally, breaking the silence. They're calling it the Nexus Incident, and adding it to military academies across known space. Connor chuckled. That makes it sound more impressive than it was. We just got creative with limited resources. No, Zareth said firmly, turning to face him. It was more than that. You showed us something we'd never seen before. A way to fight that doesn't compromise who you are. Most species believe that war requires you to become a monster to defeat monsters, but you proved that wrong. Humans learned that lesson the hard way, Connor replied, his expression growing serious. We spent centuries thinking that strength meant being willing to do anything to win. It nearly destroyed us. We only survived because we finally understood that how you fight is just as important as whether you win. Zareth studied his profile in the starlight. Is that why you were chosen for this mission? Because you represent the best of humanity? I represent one aspect of humanity. The part that believes in protecting others and finding creative solutions and showing mercy when possible. He turned to meet her gaze. But there are billions of humans and each of them represents something different. That's what makes us strong. And what do I represent? The question slipped out before she could stop it. And she felt her scales shift to that pale pink color that she still couldn't control around him. Connor was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. You represent someone who was brave enough to question everything they'd been taught when they saw a better way. Someone who was willing to risk their life for a child they'd never met. Someone who chose to fight beside a stranger rather than run to safety. I learned that from you. No, Connor said, shaking his head. You didn't learn it from me. I just gave you permission to be who you already were. The words hit her like a physical force, and suddenly she understood something that had been eluding her for days. The qualities she admired in Connor, the courage, the moral certainty, the willingness to risk everything for others, they weren't exclusively human traits. They were choices. Choices that anyone could make regardless of species. The Galactic Council has made a formal request, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What kind of request? They want Earth to establish a permanent military advisory position. Someone to help develop new defensive strategies and train other species in human tactical thinking. She paused, her heart's racing. They've specifically requested you. Connor's eyes widened. That would mean staying in galactic space indefinitely, years away from Earth. Would you consider it? That depends on what? Connor turned to face her fully, and she saw something in his blue eyes that made her breath catch. On whether I'd be working alone or with a partner. The implication hung in the air between them, full of possibility and risk and hope. Connor, she said carefully, there are protocols about relationships between diplomatic personnel, cultural barriers, political implications. Are you going to let those stop you from exploring what you're feeling? It was the same question he had asked her before, but now it carried different weight. Now it wasn't just about attraction or curiosity. Now it was about the possibility of building something real together. No, she said, and this time her voice was strong and certain. I'm not. Connor smiled, reaching out to take one of her 4 hands in both of his. The contact sent warmth racing through her entire body. Good, he said, because I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about learning to be human. I think you've got it backwards. What do you mean? I don't think you need to learn to be human. I think humanity needs to learn from you. You've shown me what leadership really looks like when it's combined with genuine compassion. You've demonstrated courage that comes from caring about others, not from anger or aggression. And you've proven that someone can be raised in privilege and still choose to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. Zareth felt tears forming in her large, golden eyes. Another physiological response she couldn't control around this remarkable human. What are you saying? I'm saying that if the Galactic Council wants me to stay and help develop new defensive strategies, I can't think of anyone I'd rather work with than a certain alien princess who's taught me that being strong means being willing to break the rules when innocent. Lives are at stake. The diplomatic quarter of Zareth's mind immediately began calculating the political ramifications of such a partnership. The personal quarter wondered about the logistics of an interspecies relationship. But the part of her that Connor had awakened, the part that had learned to act from the heart, simply felt joy. There will be challenges, she said. Cultural differences, political opposition, practical complications. Probably, Connor agreed. But humans have a saying, Nothing worthwhile is ever easy. And this feels worthwhile. Zara thought about everything that had happened over the past few days. She thought about the frightened child they had saved, the station they had defended, and the way Connor had shown her what it meant to live according to her values instead of just her training. "All right," she said finally. "Let's see what happens when a human soldier and an alien princess try to change the galaxy." Connor's smile was brighter than the stars outside. "I think we're going to be amazing." As they sat together in the observation lounge, hands intertwined, Zarath realized that her struggles to remain composed around this human soldier were over. She no longer wanted to maintain her careful diplomatic facade. She wanted to be herself, all of herself, with someone who had shown her what that really meant. 6 months later, when the first joint Human Galactic Defense Academy was established, its founding principles would be carved in stone at the entrance: strength without cruelty, victory without vengeance, courage guided by compassion. Below that, in smaller text, would be the names of its co-founders: Staff Sergeant James Connor of Earth and Princess Zarath of Thessera Prime. But those achievements were still in the future. Tonight there was just a human soldier and an alien princess, watching the stars and planning a life together that would prove that the best of humanity wasn't limited to humans alone. And in the end, that might be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not their technology or their tactics, but their belief that anyone, regardless of species or background, could choose to be better than they were yesterday. It was a very human idea, and Princess Zarath had learned to be proud of thinking like a human.